All right, so welcome to the new Knowledge Exchange webinar series. My name is Michael Guerin, and I'm today's host. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest speaker, Mark Elliott. Mark's professional career spans 18 years as a meteorologist for the Weather Channel, as both an on-camera meteorologist and as a storm specialist, and more recently as the principal meteorologist at AT&T. In today's webinar, our focus will be on the early parts of Mark's career and how he got to be the success he is today. In terms of format, we'll ask that all of our audience members remain on mute, but we encourage you to submit questions via the Zoom chat, and we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we can at the end of the webinar. And without further ado, Mark, why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much. That's the short of it, right? Came out of Rutgers, went to the Weather Channel, and I like to say that it's a series of planned accidents that brought me to the long career at the Weather Channel and beyond. Because it's reasonably rare to start right at the Weather Channel. There's only a couple of us that have done that. It's much more common, especially for the on-air group, to jump around to a bunch of small markets and eventually get, recognized or have an agent or whatever the case may be, and then wind up at the Weather Channel. My path was a little bit different from that. I did start in radio at the Weather Channel, and so I didn't go on air right away. But honestly, part of what brought me there was my experience at Rutgers. That as a student, the meteorology club and the meteorology program got involved in a whole bunch of new ventures. That includes the what was called the on-campus TV Weather Watcher program. We started going to the AMS conferences through the groups. Through the co-op program. I had internships focused on weather, and so I said yes to everything. And that honestly is my big take-home message to anyone that's looking in as a student still. It's to say yes to as much as your schedule can let you. I was the PAM site manager, the photochemical assessment monitoring site at Rutgers, so I was going through the data and deleting birds that flew across the sounder. I did an internship at News 12 New Jersey. I did an internship at the National Weather Service. I went to the AMS conferences and handed in a resume at the Weather Channel booth for a summer internship and didn't hear back and didn't get told no, right? Which is so frustrating when you're applying to places as a new potential employee or straight out of school and you're applying, you don't even get told no. You're like, this resume is awesome. Why are you not even rejecting me? You're just ignoring me, which somehow is even worse. And apparently that resume floated around the Weather Channel for a year and a half. And basically, as I was graduating from Rutgers, somebody in the radio department was going on maternity leave. And one of the many things I had said yes to at Rutgers was being part of the WRSU news. So I had radio experience on my resume. Somehow that was flagged. More power to the Weather Channel for keeping that resume and flagging that particular thing. And I got a call in my Rutgers dorm room from the manager in the radio department, and who got my roommate on the phone first, who thought it was a prank. We'll leave that story to another time. But it eventually got to me, and it was basically like, we've got this part-time job. It starts in August. It ends by November. It's no more than 30 hours a week. It's no more than 4 days a week. You're not allowed to work in the month of December. There's no moving expenses. There's no help finding an apartment or a place to live. This is May, mind you. We want you there as soon as possible. I think I said it starts in August. I think they wanted me even earlier than that. They're like, we want you immediately, as soon as you can figure out how to, graduate and get down here. Do you want it? And so my answer was yes. And I graduated and I, waited to get an actual letter that said, we're hiring you. Which is also important if you're about to make a big life move, to have something in writing. And so I one weekend flew down to Atlanta and rented a car and rented an apartment and signed a 1 year lease for a 4 month job, and then flew home, packed my whole life into a teal sable station wagon, drove it to Atlanta the next weekend, and started work that Monday. It was and then wound up staying for 18 years after that part-time job that was not supposed to be past the month of November. So again, do everything and say yes and be willing to make some mistakes while you're young and have the rest of the career to get paid more later, right? And then, because you don't know what it's going to turn into. For me, it turned into this amazing career so far.
Right. I think that's something that, I've seen and heard from a lot of different people, having done these interviews and, even before that, that, you never know what saying yes to something can lead to down the road when it comes to getting jobs or employment. Maybe even it's just a meeting with somebody. You don't know if the having a meeting with an executive at, say the Weather Channel or the National Weather Service or whatever, that could lead to, it's like, okay, well, now I know somebody in there. Now I've kind of got my foot in the door, and now, maybe there's opportunities. And, and again with the resume thing, I think that really speaks volumes that, you know, you shouldn't, some people, myself included, we get intimidated in applying for jobs. All these jobs say, oh, we want 10 years experience, but also you have to have this, that, and the other thing, and this program's only, all the good stuff. And we get intimidated by that. I'm sure, everybody does.
Yeah,
And it's not that doesn't mean you shouldn't apply, because maybe you're not right for this position, but that doesn't mean it's like you're not right for the next position, and they'll see your name on that pile and they'll be like, oh, this guy, I remember this guy, and then they'll say, hey, why don't we give
yeah.
him a call? And that sounds like what happened, with you at the Weather Channel. It took a little longer than some people might expect, but things take time, and that's.
Yeah, and more than that, like what you mentioned there of not waiting to see every job requirement be something that you feel absolutely proficient in before you apply to it, I think is really important, and maybe particularly important for young females to hear. Apparent, social science will say that there's a
Mhm.
big split on applying for jobs, especially in the STEM fields, where the males will say, I'm close enough, and apply and just see what happens. And the females will undersell what they are able to do,
Mhm.
so much so that they convince themselves, and this is very stereotypical in that way. Like it's not all men and not all women,
Right, right.
but advice is for everyone that's watching. If there's something that interests you, if the job sounds good to you, apply for it and see what types of things that you've done in the past can somehow fit that job descriptor and somehow fit that resume ask or that requirement that's on there, and sell it on that cover letter. You'll learn the rest. You're there,
Right.
you got to that point for a reason. You'll learn the rest.
Right, exactly. And it's just, you gotta put yourself out there, essentially, is what it boils down to. And you can't do that if you don't, if you don't apply to these things. And of course that advice applies to everybody, men, women, etc. And to not just for meteorology, which is kind of the focus of what we have today, but in any job field. Heck, my brother recently, last year, was applying for jobs as a tax accountant, and he wasn't sure he was, qualified for some of these things he was applying for, but he got one, and he's been doing, well, tax accounting. I don't know how he enjoys it, but
Somebody must, or they
yeah,
wouldn't have tax accountants,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, so, just a quick question, or maybe not
Yeah.
quick, but so what made you, want to become a broadcast meteorologist over, say, a lot of people have, it's usually a 50-50 split between the broadcast meteorologists, like yourself, and the more behind the scenes, kind of like National Weather Service type meteorologists, more like me, I guess.
Yeah. And I kind of break the mold in many ways, I'd argue, because when I was about to graduate, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be in meteorology, and I was applying to anything that was even remotely close to meteorology jobs. I applied at the time. There was very few National Weather Service entry level positions coming open, but I applied to one that was in Puerto Rico, and I was like, I knew Spanish in high school. Like it is not something I knew fluently. I was like, but again, I'll learn it if you guys are willing to look at somebody that isn't fluent yet. And I didn't get that job. I applied to um, a Sonoma Tech, which is an air quality monitoring meteorology job in California. And I think I have that name right. That was my real first interview. Like they flew me out and I was so nervous and I bombed that interview. I got questions. I didn't know what to expect going in. Like I was prepared for you know, why do you think you're good for this job? Or, the kind of the typical resume questions that you might get, or, interview questions, which can be really weird,
Yeah.
right? I know someone at the Weather Channel that used to ask, and hopefully they're not watching and I'm giving away their secrets. Like, tell me how you make a sandwich, like just to see if somebody could think on their feet and give details of what they put where and when, and like make full sentences and not get thrown by such a weird question. So I was ready for those. What I bombed was basic meteorological knowledge that, like, you know you know backwards and forwards
Mm.
and easy, like, but I just somehow, flying to a different time zone and talking to people and having a huge slate of interviews, I was not mentally ready for it. And I just totally blanked. Things like, explain how, an inversion looks on a skew T and how that changes with time as the sun comes up and the day changes. How does the inversion lift? And
Mm.
I will never forget the correct answer to that because I did not get it right. I know I didn't get it right during that interview. And as an air quality place, they could not hire me, even if I was perfect, and maybe if they knew that I would get that right forever, they couldn't then hire me. I bombed that interview. Um, but that was not for TV, right? That was not a broadcast interview. And again, the Weather Channel broadcast position came to me because I had all that broadcast experience because I liked it. But I, had just basically started trying to get a tape together and apply to some smaller, TV weather jobs in the middle of nowhere. And that opportunity came my way. So had it not, I'm not sure if I would have wound up on TV. I probably would have wound up, there's far, you can make the argument, far more other kind of meteorologically adjacent environmental jobs that were available at the time that I was applying for. And I probably would have wound up in one of those or gone straight to grad school, which I instead went to later, and then found a different path. And so it wasn't necessarily I'm going to do broadcast meteorology. It was I'm going to do meteorology and I'm going to find a way in
Right.
somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that, that interview story, I think that's really important to highlight. Not the necessarily the mistake, of course, um,
Hey,
but
but it didn't derail me, right? Like
right,
that's
right.
you can not get a job for lots of different reasons
Yeah.
and still be okay.
Yeah, and I think I think it's equally important to, kind of. I know interviews are a little bit different nowadays, especially with we have Zoom now, so most interviews I think occur over Zoom, so you don't have to worry about the jet lag aspect. But being nervous for an interview, you don't tend to think, people don't tend to think this anyway. That you look at somebody like you that's been on air for 18 years, like, oh, that guy never gets nervous about anything, but that's not the case. You see the interview story. That's why I think, nervous for an interview, that's normal. If I have a personal philosophy that I'm sure a lot of people share. If you the minute you stop being nervous is the minute you stop being alive.
Mm.
We're supposed to be nervous. That's just how it is. And I think especially that's part of the reason why we do this webcast. That's part of the reason why we have the knowledge exchange, so that students and early career professionals can come and ask people, like you, for instance, for help with these things because you've been there, you've done that.
Yeah.
It's a lot more helpful when you can, at least, so I've been told, when you can empathize with the person that's asking you for help. So you don't tend to think that, oh, this, whoever I'm asking, whether it's you or if it's a professor like Dr. Lupo from University of Missouri, or somebody else, you don't think, oh, they've done it all, they never had to struggle for anything. But talking to these people over the last couple of months, I've come to realize that everybody has had to struggle to where they've gotten to get to. And that's something that I think is important to always point out. You're gonna struggle to get to be a success. That's just how it is. You don't have to sweat those details, but you still have to keep pushing forward, essentially.
Yeah, and I would not be as nervous for that same interview or other interviews now as I
Right.
was then. There has to be a first. And so take the interviews. Take the interview that you might, the interviews as much for the person being interviewed as it is for the company that's hiring them. You might decide that it's not a good fit, but you get the experience of doing an interview, which is totally different when it's live. And it's not just, your parents or your friends prepping you for an interview. It's that experience is very different. And I didn't do well my first time out, and it made me better.
Right. Right. Exactly. And it's you obviously everything gets better with practice, and interviews are one of those things as well. And I'm not suggesting anybody should go out and go interview for every job you can find to get as much practice, but certainly don't shy away. If a company wants to interview you for a position, certainly don't shy away from that. And certainly obviously, if the company doesn't seem like a good fit to you, then obviously you, of course, I think that's also important. Don't, just because a company likes you doesn't mean you have to like that company. Or even you can certainly say no, of course, with things like that, if of course, you have the ability to to do so, and you're not um so to kind of keep the ball rolling on that topic, were there any difficult choices or sacrifices that you had to make um in order to get to be the big shot at that you were at the Weather Channel?
Are there any, you said, risks to
or
take?
or sacrifices, difficult choices, risks, sure, any of those.
Yeah, and sorry if you hear my phone blowing up in the background. The
Yeah, no
the
problem.
weather jobs never stop,
Hmm.
and that is one of the risks.
Hmm.
Um, the including now, right? I'm doing this, but there are people from work that are like blowing up the phone, and that happens. You have to know that weather is 24/7,
Right.
and because of that, you can miss weekends, you can miss holidays, you can miss normal sleep schedules, you can miss there's vacation time, right? Hopefully you don't miss birthdays and like important things that you want to be at with your family, but there are things that you have to be aware of going into that. And my I moved for that Weather Channel job, and the closest person I knew to Atlanta was in Tallahassee. Not exactly close.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I had left New Jersey. That was a very big move, a big change. My whole family was still in the Northeast at that time, and so that was difficult at best. Um, and then for risk stuff to get um, the for taking risks, I think it's really important to do that, especially when you're young, when you're new in the careers, or when you're just graduating. Again, because you don't know what it'll turn into. And so, I started the Weather Channel in radio, and At the time, NBC was kind of looking into the Weather Channel and maybe thinking of buying the Weather Channel, and eventually did. Uh, just before that, there was a manager who I can safely say was the worst person to work for. Managers often, there's all kinds of different styles. Some work better for others, and maybe his worked perfectly for him, and for others, maybe that reported to him. For me, it wasn't my style. He actually said this in a meeting, that he has a closed door policy, not an open door policy, a closed door policy, that he was the biggest boss, and that there was a very maybe military type mode of this. There was a chain of command. And if you had a shift manager, you had to go through them. And if they could bring it to their manager, and that manager could bring it to the next person, and that person was the only one that could bring it to the big boss. Didn't really work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? My mentality and how I interact with people just wasn't going to fly. And so I was actually applying for jobs then too. I was trying to leave the Weather Channel then. And as it turned out, he left, or I don't know if he got fired or if he left on his own. I don't remember, but I outlasted him. And the next boss that came in was basically the polar opposite, and said, bring me everything. You talk to me about anything. If something's not working, let's make it better together. And I pitched a radio show to this boss. I said, for what Mad Money did for finance, or what The Daily Show did for politics, or what Car Talk did for cars and fixing things, those all, Daily Show maybe less directly, but the other two very directly, started as radio programs. They were radio call-in shows. And I said, what if we were to have a weather radio call-in show from the Weather Channel that could then be syndicated to all these affiliates that we have that use the Weather Channel forecast around the country? And, we can have topics of the day. We can talk about them. We can have people send in their questions about how weather works. And we're going to have all this stuff and this and that. It was this whole, pitch for a radio show. And he said, that sounds really fun and really interesting. And we just can't do it as a department. To do that right, you'd need a totally different setup for radio booths, with producers on one side of the glass, and they could then take calls and move it forward and put them on air, and people that time it. And like, we're not equipped for that. That's not really what we do. We don't have the budget for it, and we might never get the budget for it. And he said, but I'm in all these meetings with NBC, and this sounds like a television show. And so why don't I put a feeler out for you? And so that feeler turned into me going in front of a room of people that to this day I have no business ever have been speaking to out loud. It was the head of Peacock Productions, the head of NBC News Ventures, the people that were in charge of the Weather Channel's purchase, some of the Weather Channel bigwigs, and just a giant boardroom, right? One of the giant tables that you see on TV, right? It looks like a cartoon. And they basically brought me in and said, sit down at the head of the table and tell us what you're thinking about. And because I didn't know who they were, and I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't have the opportunity to second guess myself or to be nervous about it, and just said, yeah, here's what I'm thinking. And here's what, here was the pitch of the radio show, but here's how it would look as a TV show. And here are some segments and how you could break up half an hour for kind of live long form. Some of the stuff could be recorded in advance, big topics, but it could also have live segments and cover the weather live and cover the severe storms from our point of view as we needed to do it. And this boardroom full of people that I shouldn't have been talking not only greenlit this project, but kept me on as a host with no true TV experience other than, and an internship at News 12 New Jersey, had the foresight or the, I don't know, the mistake to say, yeah, let's keep you on, and flew me to New York, uh, brought me into Rockefeller Center. I had a day with Jimmy Fallon's stylist, and we went shopping through New York City and made a whole lookbook for the show. Um, Piloted it, right? They hired a whole crew. We rented out different space, made pilots of this thing. It was going to be called Lightning Rod, like cover the weather with a personality and a viewpoint. And uh, this was years and years and years ago. So it was, kind of what ESPN Sports Nation did later with, we had this interactive ability with, it's funny, Microsoft Surface, which became their little tablet, right? The Surface, but at the time was a giant touchscreen coffee table that was in mostly hotel rooms, and we got them to give us one, and we built weather apps for it and a camera that filmed it from above, so that we could, you'd see my hands moving the map, which is kind of what I think Weather Nation had for a while. You could see them moving some of the graphics on air, in that way, not that product, but like how they were filming it. And so we built all this stuff, and Weather Channel Social is what came out of that. The spoiler is that show became a segment within the evening show, on the Weather Channel. We hired a co-host, like we had this whole thing. It focus grouped and focus grouped and focus grouped, and they launched it as a segment, which was totally jarring because it wasn't supposed to feel like the rest of the day. It wasn't supposed to feel like the rest of the Weather Channel. So that show tossed it to a different studio in the same building, almost like a remote, and we did something and then tossed it back to them. And it was jarring, and it was universally hated. The show that was on hated it. It took their momentum away. We hated it because we didn't have enough time to actually do anything that we wanted. The bosses hated it because it never made any sense. And the boss at the time that, kind of greenlit all of this left for a new opportunity, and the new boss the next day fired everyone, fired our whole team, said, this is not happening. You're all done. Brought me, I had an HR meeting. I had my contract then, after, because I had switched from radio to TV at that point, and I was under contract, and they basically said, you're fired, because your contract says this show name, and that show's not going to exist. And so instead, here's this contract. Like, and then everyone took a beat, and they were like, but we don't want to get rid of you yet because you still have these ideas. And so they handed me a new contract, and then I had to decide if I was going to re-sign to not do what I thought I was about to be doing and figure it out. And again, I said yes to it because it was still the Weather Channel, and I didn't feel like I was done there, and signed on a new contract. But most of my friends that I had building that show and brought them in, and I brought them in, I hired them, because I had, not me exclusively, but I had some say on who the team was going to be. They all lost their jobs. And so that was a tough day. And a couple of them we were able to kind of bring on to other positions later and bring back because they were good. But yeah, so that was one of those big kind of risk moments. Big risk and sacrifice to say that I was going to do that and talk to those people in the first place. Another risk and tough moment when everyone was fired from it because it didn't work, and then to pick up pieces and move forward from there. All of that is really difficult to do, but I'm glad in some ways those mistakes turned into what they did.
Right, and I think that's a great story, and I wish we had a little bit more time so I could dig a little deeper into that. But so maybe next time.
Yeah, you can
Um,
always find me.
yeah. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. Really loved the discussion. I hope our viewers, both here and on YouTube, find your talk as interesting and inspiring as I did. And I really hope we can have you back soon to talk about other periods of your career.
Sure. And the Knowledge Exchange, if people want to ask more on there, they can find me on that as well.
Yep, and for the and still a little bit of my thunder there, but
Sorry,
um,
I talk for a living. It's
uh,
a fatal flaw.
so as for the folks who'd like to talk further with Mark and or perhaps solicit career advice, you can book a meeting with Mark via the knowledgeexchange.com. We have a whole new system in place to do that. You can send him a message as well. While you're on the Knowledge Exchange, you may want to look around. There's a lot of givers and mentors who are available, Dave and myself included, who are happy to meet and share their knowledge. And finally, we'll be posting all of our videos on our YouTube channel, the link to which is in your MailChimp email. You can also find more info about the Knowledge Exchange on our Facebook and LinkedIn pages. And if you have any questions for today's moderator or speaker, you can find us at info@knowledgeexchange.com. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for watching.